Burgess and Boltons weekly wrap-up.
Hello, Ben.
Hello, Jeremy. Happy Nearly Friday.
Happy Nearly Friday. Yes, pre-recording this week because we are busy getting ready for TinTech, which is coming up, and we're going to do a bit of a preview ahead of that. But welcome everybody to this week's edition of Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap-up, where we look at everything to do with the London market, technology, change, innovation. And this week, we're going to have a dive into some risk manager reports. But first off, Ben, we've got a story here about Berkshire Hathaway.
Yeah.
Let me add this. The power of reputation.
So this chap, Robert Armstrong, is very good. If anybody gets a chance to read him in the FT, he does a column called Unhedged, and he looks at how economies are going in relation to investing and all sorts, really. But he's very good. And he was the guy who invented the phrase taco.
Trump always chickens out.
Yes. And he used it to describe the tactic of Trump sort of putting big tariffs out there and then pulling them. And said that is basically a phrase, and it's become used now on Wall Street. Anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about, but it shows the provenance and the brilliance of this man, Robert Armstrong. Anyway, he did with his team, he did a really interesting analysis, actually, which I think is relevant to our market, which is about Warren Buffett, who's just retired. And Berkshire Hathaway, of course, everybody knows, has had a fantastic performance over a long period of time. And people are now looking at it and saying, well, what are the factors, that cause that performance? And of course, the first thing you go to is what sort of investments did Buffett make? And they've done which I won't go into here, you'll be glad to know, a pretty kind of exhaustive analysis. Edward Finlay of Arrow Wealth Advisory. And it's a regression analysis, basically looking at all the correlating factors of his investments that he made and so on and so forth. And basically, if I can sum it up, Buffett, as we know, kind of went for boring investments that weren't kind of high alpha, as they call them, with lots of big returns, big profit returns, big margins, but lower in both in value and size, and the kind of being exposed to the market, buying bigger tranches and all that sort of thing. So quality of what he bought was not necessarily very good. He wasn't trying to buy the best or anything. He was just trying to be optimal, I suppose. And the returns were pretty good. And so there's a gap here of the percentage points, if you look at the average performance of these stocks and then the actual performance of Berkshire Hathaway. So what was the difference between what he invested in and what his company actually did? And one of the things it says too is that you keep on, more that you look at it, you can't really see what it is about his investments to do. So it's something to do with possibly something else. And what is that? Well, that is Berkshire, is Buffett himself. And so what he is saying here, Robert Armstrong, is the possibility is that really, if you look at it, rule everything else out, you're only left with the fact that the market's attitude towards Berkshire Hathaway and Buffett's way of working was the secret sauce, if you like, the thing that really got him to be so successful, or got those shares to be so successful. And it wasn't, and he represents kind of safety and prudence. So at times when things were going wrong, like the .com and the crash and all that sort of thing, he came through. But also all through that period, and he's quite a showman, of course, he talked a good game, wrote his letter every year, and became more and more kind of associated, like almost his brand the Berkshire Hathaway brand is Buffett himself, and how he operates, and to an extent, Charlie Mongham, who was his, kind of business partner, who died a couple of years ago. Rather than his pure financial skill. So I think it's really interesting that someone who you kind of intuitively think of as incredibly clever at reading balance sheets, working out what companies do, and I'm sure he's good at all that, of course he is, but really he kind of made boring charismatic, and therefore became the stock to go for when you weren't sure. And that created a really, really successful business. And I think generally, brands and so on, back to the old Barnum and Bailey circus, that was the thing. It was all about showmanship. And you look in our own industry, you've got, Chubb. Yeah. Who else we got? We got, trying to think of some others. I mean, to an extent, people like Stephen Catlin, Ryan, people, those sorts of iconic people attract investment and money and capital because of their characters, their charisma, I suppose.
Yeah. And on the other side of the fence, if you look at kind of, whereas Buffett is that kind of steady ship in a storm, you've got the other side, which is kind of mad genius professor, which kind of you could put the label on Elon Musk. And again, that attracted lots of capital because he was seen as this kind of quirky genius who could just, put his mind to anything and, rockets, cars, whatever you like. It would be
it's exactly right. And I think it's also, what are you going to invest in? I mean, you think of an investment is portfolio is fairly simple. You have some volatile stocks and some non-volatile stocks, don't you? So you go, in a way, the brand works in there really, which is like, yes, we'll have some Tesla and we'll have a bit of SpaceX, and then we'll have a bit of Berkshire to offset that. And I guess that's how markets operate. But it's very interesting having, going through a very exhaustive analysis of a very well analyzed known business with all the data you can throw it at, and you're still left with down to him, down to the leader, the CEO.
Yeah, it is. Another thing I was just going to say on the Musk point and to the brand point, if you become off brand, like you've seen with Musk and his escapades in the last few months in the White House, and that almost being laid open, the veil is being drawn back, and you kind of you see the madness, but not the genius. And then you kind of, the brand then starts to get tarnished.
Yes, and I think you also, what you talk about in the brand world is brand extension. How far can you extend your brand to do new products and things like that, or new things? And I think Musk has overextended his brand by saying, I can go into government and start cutting and doing all that stuff. I mean, apart from the fact that, it's quite unpopular and it, as you say, looks slightly unhinged. So yes, I think it's kind of overreach, isn't it, in his case, really?
Yeah. Interesting. Very, very interesting. I like that branding stuff. We'll be doing more branding, won't we, throughout the year? We're doing some marketing stuff at the Data Jam, and you've got some more of your brand next stuff. So, good.
Lots going on.
Right. Let's move things on. So, risk managers, Ben, let's put the right thing up. So Strategic Risk magazine for risk managers, if I'm not mistaken.
I looked at this and I thought, yawn. Here goes another survey of risk managers. Top risks. Gosh, how many of these have we seen?
Yeah.
The most boring thing in the industry, in my opinion.
But this one, we actually got some news out of it.
Little sting in the tail, yeah.
Got a bit of a sting, yeah. So go and give us the.
Okay, so it's a Strategic Risk is a risk manager's publication, and it's about it's a decent sized study of global risk managers and what they're up to, and how the profession is changing. And
I would have called it risky business.
Yeah, you would have done, but yeah, I mean it. Yeah. Okay.
That's what the podcast. That's a spin-off podcast.
It is. Someone's
probably got
doesn't
that.
Beasley already do that as its thing? Risky business. That's its strat line.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I'll have to come up with another one. Give me 2 minutes.
I think Beasley's patented it or trademarked it. So anyway, this study, interesting, because if you go to the next slide, so let's just have a look at the kind of boring-ish bit, which is the next one, not that one, this one. So which risk areas are of greatest concern to your business in 2025? Well, not surprisingly, cyber risk, operational risk, geopolitical risk. Geopolitical's gone up, not surprising. Supply chains got down a bit since COVID. So there's nothing. A bit of ESG comes in that's still there, actually. I mean, that is sort of interesting. That's still quite a big deal.
Quite surprising it's in there, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of ignoring of the US stuff, to be honest. I think that stuff is still going on. I think there's quite a lot of culture stuff that's coming from the regulator, and businesses intrinsically know some of this stuff is quite important. Anyway, it's not a massively surprising list. But then the next thing really caught me unawares, which is what are risk managers doing? So if you go to that slide, which strategies will your team be focusing efforts on in the next 12 months? Choose 3. So, okay, so what strikes me, first of all, let's just spoil it straight away, is insurance buying is only 15%. And, that is really low, I think, if you think of what we talk about in, with clients in insurance companies and all that sort of thing. It just seems that, there isn't much, if you like, that's going on in terms of insurance via these risk managers into the boardroom. And I think that's kind of depressing, really, and a bit kind of worrying for insurance if it's going to grow in future. So and I think that I'm just going to find the quote here.
While you're doing that, I'll give a shout out to Julia Graham and the AMIC conference, which is happening next week in Liverpool. I'm sure that'll be good. Normally you get some really good results from their work.
Yeah, well, that's coming up, isn't it? So that's in the next week. Let me just find this quote if I can. Sorry. It's here somewhere. So this is the guy. This is the guy who is the Steve Tunstall, who's the general secretary at PARIMA, which is the Pacific RIN, I think.
Risk Managers Association.
Risk and Insurance Managers Association. Right. So he says that, and he's just talking from a manager perspective, but I think the table supports this. He said, for many organizations, insurance procurement remains a transactional process that has little relevance to the board. This has been brought on by the industry itself to some extent by failing to stay relevant to top board risks over the last 30 years. Whew, quite a damning indictment of the insurance sector from a risk manager representative. And this table sort of says, look at all the other things that they're doing. And I'm not saying that insurance isn't involved in some of these things, but there is a lot going on here, which I think the insurance businesses could be more involved with, in the risk sector. And also the article says that risk is getting more and more important to boards as the world gets riskier and more difficult to second guess. There are also comments about ART, alternative risk transfer, saying that, this is quite important, but because the insurance industry hasn't really kind of got up to speed with it, that, most of the risk managers are still relying on their brokers for advice, and they're not really thinking about ART, but brokers, he says rightly, which I've always thought, asking brokers to advise on ART and captives is mostly like asking turkeys to advise on Christmas. because of course it destroys the industry. And I've always thought that, it's like, when Chris Lay at Marsh or somebody talks about captives, I thought, well, that's kind of talking yourself out of a job.
Yeah.
We do work in a weird industry, don't we, really? Just so strange. But yeah, so it's fascinating, really.
It is. You can also look,
if you like, between the risk management area and then and I know Julia Graham talks about this, but it's vast, really, between the industry itself and the risk managers.
Yeah, it is. And I think it comes down to a lot of things that we talk about, the getting the basics right, the communications, the asking for information over and over again, the long supply chains, the time it takes, the expectations, and things like that. I think we can also link this in to Lloyd's and the London market more widely. So Patrick Tiernan took over this week, and he had his opening statement, his opening address, and it was put out on LinkedIn. And it was actually pretty good. It's quite personal. He talked about his own kind of troubles and how he's kind of bounced back from that. But one thing really caught out in the whole thing, which is a paragraph that says, our primary focus, both in terms of time and money, must be on activities that support sustainable profitability and underwriting discipline through the economic cycle, while deprioritizing those activities that don't. And I think that sums up perhaps the lack of two things: lack of ambition. So that 15% that you put in there, that to me is an opportunity to get back on the horse and get more of get higher up that chart, by having products and services that actually matter. And so you'll spend more time as a risk manager wanting to be there. But it comes to kind of Julia's point when she talks at London Market Claims of the experience there. It is the industry navel gazing at its own internal processes, for profitability and underwriting discipline, rather than about innovation, about customer, about excellence, about claims. I'm kind of with you. I think we need to be more ambitious in this stuff. And I know he probably has to say that, but to say it's our primary focus, I think is just aiming a bit low. Really.
I agree. And I think one of the things through this whole conversation today is this lack of sort of commerciality in a way. And, the industry always says, oh, we're getting more commercial, but it's not very commercial to say all we're going to do is focus on discipline and cost management and that sort of thing. I know why he says it, because Lloyd's is worried about the soft market. Lloyd's is worried about its position losing business and losing share. And Lloyd's is worried about its kind of investment appeal as a very volatile market. So volatility, while it's sort of built into the Lloyd's model, is kind of not so appealing, funny enough, to investors. So I get the reason why Tiernan talks about some of that stuff and says that. But you're right. There also needs to be a counterbalance of, we're going to focus on growth and the customer, because what Tiernan's saying is discipline, which is fighting the market in a way, because every single insurer that we go into says we're going to grow nowadays. They're all going to grow because they have to. And it's not like, oh no, we're just going to sit back and wait. I mean, I don't talk to small syndicates these days, but the bigger ones and the big insurance companies, we're going to grow and we're going to beat the competition and we're going to innovate and we're going to do all the things we do. But you're right. If Lloyd's isn't saying that, and if the big names in the industry are constantly going on this kind of inside-out view, it's all about just the inputs, all about our underwriters being disciplined, well, it loses. You're not going to grow the cake, are you? You're really not going to grow the cake. And look, if you look at this list here, there's a ton of stuff which you could make money out of. And it's daft to say how we make money. I don't know that. So if you take cyber, you sell services with cyber, right? And other products in the insurance market. And that's a way to do it. And brokers get a lot of money for fees, advisory fees, like setting up captives. But they get fees, right? The insurance pricing end of things, which is what really Tiernan is talking about in Lloyd's, is the deployment of capital, is so narrowly focused on its own thing, as you say, which is pricing a risk. And so all we do is talk about pricing a risk and the discipline, but it's only it's only one small part of the value chain.
Yeah.
And I think that conversation needs to be massively opened up, and we need a more fluid industry. And Lloyd's needs to think about that.
Definitely. Good. She segues quite neatly into something I wanted to talk about, which is kind of a preview for TinTech. So it's happening in a couple of weeks' time, or whenever you listen to it, it might have finished. Who knows? But 17th of June. Still got some tickets available if you want to come along. Got quite a few London market kind of focused sessions. Got a nice one here. Some chief operating officers. The one I wanted to kind of focus on was the session that we got on the Lloyd's and London market and enabling digitization for efficiency and growth. And the interesting thing about this session is that it isn't going to be centered around the Blueprint 2, which it has been for a number of years, because that's what people, in the ops and IT world wanted to talk about. But what's interesting about this session,
by the way, talking about things that don't make money, that'll be one for Tin and to look.
I know. Well, the first thing I said, but while deprioritizing those activities that don't. Moment.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was really interesting because this focus is going to be much more on kind of the transformation that is happening regardless of that kind of Blueprint to market modernization initiative. And when you start to talk to those organizations that you've just been talking about, those large ones that are going after growth, that are going to beat the competition, that are going to employ the best people, then now the operations and the tech stack that you've got and all the capabilities that you can run off the back of that, whether that be generative AI, agentic AI, which we'll come on to talk about it in a bit. Those are absolutely front and center of that kind of drive to be the best, the competitive, the number one competitor, and the place for talent to go to. So I think it's going to be just a really fascinating kind of different conversation at this year's event. And we've got I think we've got one broker and two underwriters on the panel there. So I think that's going to be really interesting. And I was at a panel, a breakfast briefing this morning, and where we focused on agentic AI. It wasn't in the Lloyd's of London market space, but what was really interesting was it wasn't about the art of the possible. It was the journey that WPA had been on in terms of how they, over the last 7 years, had built capabilities that allowed them to be in a place where once the technology was right, they could start to deploy agentic AI models into back-end kind of processing.
Yeah.
And that, for me, is the lesson for the London market. That if you don't get on board with this stuff, soon, if you're not on board already, then I think you probably missed the boat. You are not experimenting. You're not building up that kind of bank of knowledge about what works, what data flows you need, what needs to be 100%, what needs to be 80%. All that kind of all those skills that you can only get by actually doing it. I think you're going to be in a pretty poor place. So interesting.
It is interesting. I had I just read an interesting article this week. I didn't chuck it up here, but it's about agentic AI and how investment works. And it's just a thought really came out about how this company invests and how it decides. And they talk about in any investment in technology, for example, you have a service level agreements, and those typically look at the uptime of the software. And that's so they call it the 3 nines thing. So cloud computing, 3 nines describe their uptime. 0.999% uptime, right? So it's pretty much up all the time, doesn't fall down like and cause a problem. Anyway, so the less downtime your application can tolerate, the more nines you need in your SLA. So you have to look at your process and say, well, does it not need downtime? Which is why I think you can tolerate it, by the way, in back office things. So, and this company says it's only invested in one platform, one agentic investment, and that's in governance and compliance, agent governance and compliance. So a very, back officey type of thing, which is what we've talked about in retail as well. Robots in the back of restaurants, not in the front.
Yep, absolutely. I think that's a great place to start. That's exactly where you should be starting.
Exactly. And so what it says here, though, is when it applies to agents, it's different, because when you look at an AI model, looking at cloud computing, you're doing one thing, which is going onto the cloud, and then that's it, getting some data and whatever. But when you look at these agentic processes, they are different things. So the example an AI agent that's 92% accurate, okay, doing a process like booking a holiday, that sounds good. But if that agent has to perform 5 steps and the model is only 92% accurate at each task, when you multiply that up, don't worry about the maths, the accuracy of the workflow actually drops to 65%, because the error rate multiplies up basically through the process. So, and I kind of think we all know what that is and what that's like, which is this started off okay and then it was a disaster, right? And so what they're saying is that, booking travel is a bit of a pain if you have to do it and call people and do it online yourself. But if these agents don't get it right, and they only have 65% accuracy, it'll be hopeless. People will just say, I'm pissed off with that, I'm not going to use it anymore. So I think the
bit like EasyJet.
But it just shows you really still got to deliver. You can't just chuck this stuff in and hope. In some areas you don't need as much of this kind of 3 nines. If you're just producing, say, kind of marketing images or something like that, that can be just one step and then some human input. So he's saying, this guy here, we haven't found many situations where we can invest so far, which is interesting. So it is, as you said, it's a learning, experimental, expensive process, as always, I think.
Yeah. I think the reason that WPA could try those experiments and probably get them to work is because they've spent so long just ensuring that they are, you hear this phrase all the time in the London market, but data first or data centric, but they genuinely are. And so once you have that kind of data foundation, then that error rate that you were talking about is probably reduced, because it's working on the standardized set of data. It isn't that kind of receiving an email from EasyJet saying the flight's been cancelled, you now need to rebook it, and they take you from New York and they take you to Hong Kong because it was £3 cheaper, and in the original prompt you said make sure you get the cheapest quote.
So and you're right, and I think you've got to kind of then you kind of have to look at then all these processes, both how they work in the experience sense, but also how they actually work, whether they deliver anything better than you could have got before. Because I think if you've got good data, I know this, you can stick a spreadsheet on it and it's fine. I'm not saying you run a whole banking system on spreadsheets, obviously, but I think for a lot of things you can say, as long as the data's good, you're off to the races. Whereas actually, no good having, a bit obvious to say this, but no good having rubbish data and then saying, hey, look at this fantastic agentic AI thing that can do such and such, because the data will screw it.
Absolutely. 100%.
100%. Or 99.99%.
Yeah. Just to be clear.
Just to be clear.
So that's TinTech coming up a couple of weeks. Are you going to be there, Ben? I've asked you.
Been invited. Haven't been invited. I'd love to come.
I realised. Okay, I'll put
thank God you asked. It would have been a really awkward moment.
Would have been. What are you doing?
So, see you there, everybody. Not you, Ben.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. If I'm not washing my hair or doing something like that day.
Golf. Yeah, it might be golf day, mightn't it?
I'm golfing. Yeah, that's. Ask me the question.
What are you doing this weekend, Ben?
Well, it's not even the weekend, and tomorrow I'm off to the sunny shores of the Algarve to play golf for 3 days.
That sounds lovely.
I know.
The golf bit sounds terrible, but the Algarve is.
I know. It's like piri chicken, cold glasses of white, refreshing wine, cold beer, more beer, bit of golf.
Bit of
then
golf. Dinner.
Sunshine. It's sunny. Yeah. So, yes.
Great.
I will report back.
Yeah, very envious. Take some photos, golf courses and beer.
Yeah, I will. I mean, I've always tried to take. I do quite a lot of photography, but photos of golf courses are really boring. But I will take some anyway.
Okay, good. What am I doing this weekend? Oh, I'll tell you what I'm doing. I am running the Wateringbury Village Fete.
Wow.
I am a stalwart of the community, and that's what I do in my spare time.
And when you say running, what does that mean?
It means I went to it didn't happen last year. So this is the story. So the Village Fete didn't take place last year. And I said, why didn't it take place? And they said, oh, we didn't have enough volunteers. So I said, right, I'll volunteer then. Good. So now there's enough volunteers to take place. And then they were divvying up the tasks. And they said, who wants to just contact the stall holders and organize that? Oh, well, I said, I'll do that. Yeah, that sounds okay. That sounds not too honest. Yeah, and collect the money and get everyone's insurance certificates, and then you need to allocate, and then you need to do all the logistics for it. I was like, I should have offered the raffle ticket thing. So that's what I'm doing. Yeah, I'm also running the PIMS tent because the Friends of Waterbury Church, of which I'm the chairperson.
Whoa!
We run a PIMS tent, so I shall also be dishing up jugs of fruit-based alcoholic.
Amazing.
I hope
you are. It's people like you stand up, stalwarts of the community, man. That's
otherwise, nothing happens, does it?
Nothing. No, but you are.
I've got one of them if you want.
Well done, and I hope it goes well. I hope it doesn't rain and it's lovely weather and all that.
Yeah, it is a bit annoying when you put all the effort in and it rains and no one turns up.
Well, that's an English fate.
That's what it's all about.
Exactly. Well done. Well done. It's like an episode of The Archers, I should imagine.
Yeah. I was going to say something. I'm glad I didn't. Anyway, if anybody wants to come along, it's Wateringbury Village Fete. Just Google it and you probably won't find it. So there we go. Yeah. Right. Have a nice weekend, everybody. We will be back next week. And yeah, enjoy the weekend. See you all soon.
Bye, everybody.